Goedemiddag iedereen. Ik heet Connie en ik welkom jullie allemaal hier. Good afternoon everyone. I'm Connie. I spoke in Dutch because I live here in the Netherlands and we are here in the Netherlands for the anti-NATO, so I spoke in Dutch. But anyway, welcome everyone and we're so happy to have you here. And unfortunately, Holland is hosting the NATO summit because the head of NATO is Rutte, Mark Rutte, who used to be the Prime Minister in the Netherlands. And so for the Prime Minister and the government, they're very happy to have NATO here. But for us, I think it's very important that we're all fighting against the presence of NATO and the work of NATO in the world. This afternoon's program is hosted by several organizations. We have GWUAN and GWUAN. That is, GWUAN is Global Women for Peace United Against NATO. We have the International Women's Alliance, IWA, myself and Laura here from IWA. DM, we have and WILF. So the different organizations are here. And before we start, I would like to ask, I have only a small piece of paper. Could you please register your name? Just write clearly, because we want to be able to keep in touch with you after this. And also, in case you don't know it, thousands have demonstrated this afternoon, which is really very important, because the anti-NATO sentiment must really go bigger and bigger as the days near the summit. And this place, we were able to get this thanks to Amir. And Amir will introduce himself, and he will be the first speaker. And even if he's a man, he has very important, something very important.
Hi, my name is Amir and I'm with M25, but I'm also here I was asked this afternoon to speak because I'm born in Iran, in Tehran, and you've all seen on the news, of course, what's happened this morning, and you also know what happened last week, and the weeks and months and the years before, of course, in the region. And we're never free of turmoil ever since the discovery of oil and the natural resources that the region has. And we are continuously being subject of empire, just as the people of Congo are because of their natural resources, just as the people of Bolivia because of the lithium that they have. And this fortune that the earth has given us is also unfortunately being used for empire's purposes, and this is important to bear in mind that it's also hard to speak because all the lines are cut in Iran. The internet is cut, the landlines are not really working. We haven't heard from family, and but this what is happening right now has already been happening, of course, countless times, and Anne will maybe also speak to this at a later stage. All of this is because the need for the United States to be the dominant power and the avoidance of naturally moving towards a multipolar world, but some powers don't want that, and that means people are being sacrificed for this. And so in Europe, we are also being forced to spend more on the arms industry, and this means less buses, less ambulances, less doctors, less nurses for everybody else. And you already know in the Netherlands the impact of this with the public transport subsidy cuts, etc. And you also notice that everybody is, of course, talking about international law and this behavior of states. We also have to recognize that international law and the UN Charter that we hold so close to us, to our hearts, and we want to uphold and we want to see happen everywhere, is unfortunately not alive anymore to the extent that the rule of the jungle has taken over. It doesn't mean that we have to also abide by the same, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that the powers that be are playing by their own rules, whatever that means, and we now have to focus our actions in an asymmetric way. So take the little power that we have and be very strategic about where we put our energy, our time, and our resources. It also has meant that the mask is off. The ordinary public is a lot more open to understanding what really happens, and you see it in the Netherlands, with the new peace movement is growing in numbers. We started very small. In one meeting room in the TNI offices, there were 6, 7 of us, and now you have a few thousand people demonstrating today. And so we have to keep moving that and be a source of true information to the public, because we also know the media is playing its own role. And lastly, before I hand back, international peace, and peace is not a dead state, right? Peace is an active step that we take towards liberation, liberating ourselves, liberating others, liberating the planet. And it also means being part of people's struggle. So in your neighborhoods, in your towns, in your villages, wherever you are, being part of solidarity, helping each other, mutual aid, part of a student movement, environment movement, pensioners, support groups, it doesn't matter what it is. So we have to be a lot more active in society and connect our struggles in our societies with the struggle against militarism, with the struggle against NATO. So always important to ask these questions of who are the people we're organizing, what are our goals, how do we achieve them, and what is our power base? So that's important that we keep that in mind and keep pushing it. Thank you so much.
My name is oppressor. I'm from Women for Peace in Finland, but I'm active since the very first beginning in Global Women for Peace, United Against NATO. And we did it, we united ourselves in about 2 months in 2023 in the spring, when we learned that there will be no counter summit event at all when NATO met in Lithuania, in Vilnius. And then we said, that's not true, we have to have a counter event. And Ludo Bravander, who is the second man who has big rights to speak in our meetings, welcomed us to Brussels, and we had a 4-day event we went to the headquarters of NATO with our declaration, we went to the European Parliament, some of the women were there, and we had a really stressy time. And the basis for our cooperation is our declaration. It can be seen on our website. And this is that we are for peace and against NATO. Every woman has a background organization, but that doesn't mean that that organization is against NATO. But that means that that woman has a freedom to speak out against NATO. And that is very, very important, and we are burdening ourselves all the time. We had the declaration, you can read it on our website. It was sent out to all the NATO governments, and as I said, brought to the NATO headquarters. And we didn't go to Vilnius because there was no peace movements at all. And that goes for the whole Baltic area, unfortunately. It was also sent to all the NATO governments, to all the NATO members of parliament, NATO countries, members of parliament, which we are going to do also now. Then in 2024, the counter summit was in New York, a very expensive place to go to. So many of us couldn't go. Washington, Washington, of course, Washington. And then we decided that we will let our faces move. So we collected a photo display of some 200 photos, but representing 500 women because there were many women at one photo. And it was so successful that, and we knew that many women cannot travel to Den Hague, so we did it again. And we want to show you the display. I'm sorry for the technical problems we have. That's today's world. But we have to try to solve them. I'm also a bit sorry for the mess we had when we sent out the dates and so on, because we thought we could have had this yesterday. But then we couldn't find a venue, but thanks to Amir, thank you, we got this venue, and now we hope that we can keep the technique working. More information can be found on our website, and I hope I enjoy you for a trip around the world to see all the quite happy faces, but in their heart they are very sad because they have to fight this war machinery. So please.
NATO war crimes and involvement. NATO, founded in 1949 by 12 countries, is at present the biggest geopolitical war machine of 32 member states. The scale of expansion contributed to international tension as Russia sees itself increasingly surrounded by US and NATO bases. The alliance calls itself a defensive alliance and claims to be based on the member countries' common values of individual liberty, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. In reality, NATO is far from this. NATO has a blood-soaked history of organizing or supporting coups, brutal colonial wars, and military interventions. Within the meaning of the Nuremberg Tribunal judgment in respect to German Second World War crimes, NATO deserves the label criminal organization. Since the 1990s, NATO forces have repeatedly committed severe war crimes and crimes against humanity. In 1999, without the consent of the UN Security Council, NATO bombarded Yugoslavia, violating Article 2 of the UN Charter. NATO performed serious war crimes, such as indiscriminate bombardment of civilian centers and the use of indiscriminate weapons, including depleted uranium and cluster bombs. The Yugoslavia War of Aggression was the prelude to a series of aggressions against Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Syria, and elsewhere, during which war crimes and crimes against humanity were committed without any punishment. The International Criminal Court, in the hands of the collective West, never investigated these crimes. The war in Ukraine, which NATO expansion did much to provoke, has led to substantially increased NATO activity in Europe. Since the beginning of the war, NATO allies have provided Ukraine with unprecedented levels of financing and arming support. This unwavering support confirms that weapons, not negotiations, are NATO's unshakable motto. The genocidal Israeli war in Gaza and the West Bank, causing worldwide outrage, has been silently accepted by NATO and its allies. This despite the fact that all states have the duty to impose a full arms embargo on Israel. This duty derives from decisions of the International Court of Justice from January and July 2024 that concluded Israel is plausibly carrying out genocidal actions in Gaza in violation of the Genocide Convention, and that Israel is illegally occupying Palestine. The arms embargo duty has also been asserted by the UN Human Rights Council and various UN experts. Stopping the flow of arms, energy, food, and other key exports to Israel is meant to ensure the protection of the Palestine people. But NATO countries' arms trades in both directions continue, and Israel can count on diplomatic and military support from NATO countries and for its wars of terror. All this, alongside an increased presence in the Asia-Pacific region and across other parts of the world, increases the risk of conflicts and war. And finally, NATO is a nuclear-armed alliance. Added to nuclear bombs already stationed in the US and France, around 150 US B-61 nuclear bombs have been stationed in Europe, in Belgium, Germany, the Netherlands, Italy, and Turkey for years, and now it seems that US nuclear weapons will be brought back to Britain. NATO maintains a nuclear planning group to discuss the launching of a war that would put all life on Earth at risk. NATO coordinates rehearsals or war games practicing for the use of nuclear weapons in Europe. NATO's nuclear policies conflict with the legal obligations of the signatories to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, forbidding the transfer of nuclear weapons to non-nuclear weapon states. Yet US NATO nuclear weapons in Europe are located in non-nuclear weapon states. Furthermore, the alliance does not reject first use of nuclear weapons. NATO, the biggest war machine in the world, constitutes the greatest danger to our survival as a species. There is no doubt NATO is a criminal organization and must, in the name of survival of humankind, be dissolved.
Excerpts from the introduction of the Climate Crossfire Report. Climate mitigation and adaptation efforts are chronically underfunded by billions of dollars, deepening the climate crisis and its impacts on citizens around the world. At the same time, the richest and most carbon-polluting nations are also increasing military expenditure. Global military spending has reached a record high of $2.46 trillion. More than half of this is spent by NATO's 32 member states, and budgets are projected to increase massively in the next few years. NATO and the arms industry frequently talk about greening the military, but have totally failed to reduce emissions in any of their operations. Increased military expenditure will therefore always increase greenhouse gas emissions. According to the Climate Crossfire Report from October 2023, the total military carbon footprint of NATO rose by 30 million tonnes between 2021 and 2023. This is equivalent to putting more than 8 million extra cars on the road. If NATO's militaries were a single country, it would rank as the world's 40th largest carbon polluter. If every NATO member were to meet the earlier agreed commitment of 2% of GDP on military spending by 2028, NATO would spend an estimated additional $2.57 trillion, enough to pay for what the United Nations Environment Programme has estimated are the climate adaptation costs for low and middle-income countries for 7 years. NATO's military expenditure of $1.26 trillion in 2023 would pay the most polluting nations' unfulfilled promise of climate finance of $100 billion a year for 12 years. For European NATO members, the €1 trillion in extra spending needed to achieve the earlier agreed 2% of GDP target for military expenditure is equivalent to the €1 trillion needed for the EU Green Deal. Today, however, 2% is not the roof, but the bottom. Allies are now expected to reach at least 3% of GDP. President Donald Trump has called for a minimum of 5%. The principal beneficiary of NATO's targets is the arms industry, which has seen its revenue, profits, and share prices surge. The industry is lobbying to ensure that these profit streams are permanent by demanding long-term structural commitments to arms production and by limiting environmental commitments. Most importantly, the NATO targets, with all the attendant environmental consequences, are igniting a new arms race just as the climate crisis worsens. This will lead to increased emissions and absorb financial resources from already grossly inadequate climate finance. It is a political distraction that diverts attention from the biggest security crisis humanity has ever faced, climate breakdown. NATO is a criminal organisation and must, in the name of the survival of every living thing on this planet, be dissolved.
I'm the Secretary General of the International Women's Alliance and have been working closely with GWUAN and WILF and UNAC and of course GWUAN to put together this event. We also just had a big summit yesterday. There were actually 2 summits going on. I'm also part of the Resist NATO Coalition. Just came back off the streets to come directly here from the protest action to be in solidarity with all people around the world that are condemning the actions of NATO today, especially under the auspices of US imperialism. And as an organization, the International Women's Alliance really tries to bridge together women's struggles under the banner of dismantling its number one enemy. The number one enemy of women is imperialism. War is very destructive to women's lives. It's also the root cause for why so many women experience violence. And we know that women are used as tools of war. And so we're here to also condemn those acts, condemn NATO, and continue fighting for a world where women no longer have to suffer under the boots of imperialism, suffer under violence, and can continue to live on in a world of a just peace. So with that, I'd like to introduce a next co-organizer of this event from DM, Lucille Cornelius.
Good afternoon. My name is Lucille Cornelius. I'm the spokesperson for DM25 in the Netherlands. Revolutionary greetings, comrades in the room and around the world. Thank you for participating in these important conversations. War is a crime. And peace is not radical, but radical peace is the answer. DM25 believes in non-alignment and anti-war, a strategy for warlessness. That's where we need to be as a planet, a warless planet. Today we woke up in a far different reality than we did yesterday morning. Today we see the fulfillment of the wet dreams of violent men with diabolical ideas about our planet and our people. NATO has been priming us through their narratives and violent plans. Empires have been stoking fires that won't be easily put out. And it is clear that war is the stupidest man's idea to any of our questions. Violent men have been raping the planet, our first mother, and they continue to do with impunity. No wonder women are being murdered and raped across the planet with very few solutions in sight. Because if you couldn't respect our first mother, our womb that gave birth to humanity, it's very easy to disrespect the wombs that are present on the planet today. Perhaps the reason why I stand here today is because we recognize as women that violence can never solve the problems of the world. Perhaps us, the women, who are always pushed into back rooms, sidelines, and into fringe areas, will teach them that it takes empathy. It takes kindness, and it takes community to raise the bar for humanity and teach that love is the basis of everything that matters on earth. Perhaps we can teach them that peace is the best solution and that love truly makes the world go round. That said, we do not speak of a weak love. We do not speak of a silent love. but we speak of a powerful, revolutionary love that shouts from every platform and every space with every opportunity, a booming and resounding global sound. It is truly love that makes the world go round. Perhaps it is us, the women, who are actually the majority, who will finally teach that it is love that changes everything. To NATO, we say, all the women in this room and all the men that have come to support the women's voices, we say, get off our lands and stay out of our nation's coffers. One day, all the money in the world will mean nothing when the planet and its people are destroyed and erased. I thank you.
We did a lot for this. We were not the dreamers, the sleepers, who just didn't understand how the world is going on. I think we did a lot, but we could not stop war until now. Here in The Hague, we were founded here in The Hague, and they just passed around the Peace Palace. It was a big dream, and it is still a big dream. But today, in the context of speaking against a military alliance and a movement which is rearming Europe, but Europe is doing the war in the world also, not just Europe. But my country, Germany, was never really demilitarized. Not after World War I, not after World War II. They joined NATO 10 years from a divided country, 10 years after the end of World War II and all the mess that this country brought over the people. So today, I'm the agent of corruption for peace. And I've brought you this bloody money that Europe is now spending for war and for military alliance. And this money shows you where the money really should go and where we need the money. And the slogan, "Move the money from war to peace," was created here for our 100th anniversary from WILF, here in, not in the Café Utopia, but it was somehow a Café Utopia also. And I'm proud to be an utopist, even as an agent of corruption. So please take the money. We have dollars, we have euros, and there is, for all those who know how to use it, there is a possibility to come on a website and see what kind of alternatives we need. And this is working for health, for education, and for
when we first gathered in Brussels to voice how alarmed we as women we were by the expansion of NATO and the fast increasing militarization of the world. NATO at the time also announced officially its further expansion into Asia Pacific by setting up an office in Japan. Most of the Australian people, and women in particular, became deeply concerned that the entire Asia-Pacific region could be easily thrown into an armed conflict between neighbors and pushed into a war with China. As we know well, North Atlantic Treaty Alliance have been spreading its tentacles across the globe in all directions. Contrary to its original purpose to secure peace in Europe, if ever it was, and to guard freedom of its members, NATO has embarked on the road of expanding and extending its activities into the Indo-Pacific, pursuing military dominance way beyond its original purpose without any concern for countries and peoples living in other regions. Even though NATO officially shelved its plans for the office in Japan, it has continued to draw the region under its umbrella, where Australia plays a very important part in further strengthening its presence in many ways. The key word here is military interoperability, which refers to the ability of different military forces and groups and pacts, etc., to operate together effectively and efficiently in joint or combined operations. I think you get the picture, what's happening there. For better understanding, there are several points that I would like to bring to your attention with respect to Australia. There is a facility called Pine Gap in the center of the continent. Just a sec. It's a highly secretive intelligence facility involved in signals intelligence and satellite surveillance. It plays a significant role in US global intelligence gathering and is considered one of the most important US intelligence installations outside of the United States. Almost everything goes through that facility. The agreement was signed in 1966 and it's currently tasked with contributing to global surveillance operations and provides data to the US drone program, and you name it. Whatever they're involved with goes through Pine Gap facilities. Australia has unwisely signed two other agreements that threaten Australia's sovereignty and independence. One is force posture agreement between the US and Australia, signed in 2014, and allows the US to use Australia as an operational base in its wars and automatically makes Australia a party to any US war actions. So we are in the thick of it, whatever happens. Another one is AUKUS. And here we protest from its inception in 2021. It's a trilateral security partnership between Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States. It aims to boost the strategic build-up in the Indo-Pacific region as a response, of course, and a deterrence against perceived Chinese aggression. The agreement commits Australia to purchase at least 8 nuclear-powered submarines over the next 3 decades at an exorbitant price of 375 billion Australian dollars. Australia has signed to subsidize the US and UK submarine building industries, of which it has already paid 800 million to the US, I'm talking Australian dollars, and 600 million to the UK. The payment is non-refundable and without guarantee that the submarines will ever be delivered. So this military agreement was never been subject to public or parliamentary scrutiny and raises concerns of nuclear proliferation due to the use of nuclear and submarine technology, including possibility of the use of highly enriched uranium. There are now growing calls to cancel both of those agreements. They do not bring new quality to Australia's way of life, as they lead to increasing militarization and military spending by taking away funding from essential services like everywhere else, and people's rights to clean air, water, health, and education, to mention only a few. This deal was bad and flawed from the start, and its possible collapse offers Australia the opportunity to reclaim its sovereignty, which by signing those agreements, de facto, Australia has lost them, and pursue possibly more practical alternatives. And there is one more point that I want to bring to your attention. That's the Talisman Sabre, the largest bilaterally combined trading activity between between the Australian Defence Force and the United States military, and it takes place every 2 years, and this year it will take place from 13th of July to 4th of August, with the participation of 30,000 military troops, both in Australia and in Papua New Guinea. And these war games, of course, everything is aimed towards possible war with China. These war games will include some of the NATO member countries, the participation, and that's Canada, France, Germany, Netherlands, Norway, and of course, United States. So, and here we, global women of peace, united we stand against the worst war machine, which is steering our only planet to a possibly total catastrophe, annihilation of the humankind. Let us stay strong and unwavering in our opposition.
I come from Pakistan and I've lived in Asia Pacific all my life. The impacts of militarization, of US-led militarization, and US is also the main leading character of NATO, as all of you well know. It is very critical to fight not only NATO, really to fight US imperialism.
Yeah.
Today what we have seen happening in Iran is beyond, it's criminal. It's beyond criminal. They had no right to go and destroy nuclear facilities. If they had been alive, if they had been radioactive, it would have been a very huge catastrophe. And they couldn't care less. Right? And they don't care less because they already dropped 2 nuclear bombs in Asia Pacific.
Yeah.
And we will not forget that. The International League of People's Struggle is the largest anti-imperialist struggle across the world, and we have a very strong focus on women, primarily women workers, peasant women, and we bring out the question of, number one, the impacts of militarization on women, which at yesterday's summit I think was really discussed a lot, but also what is the women's role in stopping this wars of aggression which the US has unleashed on the world. I'm 65 years old, and as a youth, I saw the attacks of the United States, especially when the Soviet Union was coming into Afghanistan, and then my country is next to Afghanistan. I know, firsthand what it has done. So, for us at ILPS, we really encourage women's position and women's leadership to discuss the impacts, but also the character and the frontal position of women in fighting against US imperialism, and also the right to stand up actively, militantly, to drive back these forces. That is our duty. I think it is, again, I thank you. I generally see women from the north here, and it would really be wonderful to draw women from the south into this position, because that's what we need. That's where the majority of the women are, and that's where the bombs are dropping day and night. I think everybody has talked about it, I don't need to emphasize it, but Asia Pacific, because of China, is the goal. Thank you very much.
Friends, I joined this No to NATO campaign because not only has NATO embroiled Europe in an endless war, but also it is preparing and constructing a theater of conflict in Asia, which they call the Indo-Pacific. So the main threats that are documented in all NATO doctrines and in the collective foreign policies of the US, Germany, France, UK, all construct China, Russia, North Korea, Iran as the most serious and dangerous threats. And all these countries are part of this Asia-Pacific region. So the method that NATO is using to expand into the Asia-Pacific, into the Indo-Pacific region, is one by renewing and directly having new bases along with their old ones. A recent example is that of Diego Garcia, which is part of the Chagos Island chain, which belongs to Mauritius. And in April 2025, the US under Donald Trump and the UK have signed a lease with the Mauritius government, leasing out Diego Garcia for 99 years to enhance their military base, which is the biggest base for B-52 bombers, which were used by the US in Yemen, and are prepared to use it in Iran, in this conflict between Israel and Iran. The other way is that the US has inserted itself in all the hotspots or the conflicts within the Asia-Pacific region. For example, Taiwan, where they are provoking this secessionist or independence movement and provoking China, or between North and South Korea, where the earlier agreements between the two, which were more regional and bilateral between the two, where they agreed to lower tensions, have now been almost annulled. North Korea has a defense pact with Russia. Then in Philippines, they have got the permission for 4 new bases, and in addition to the ones they already have. And Philippines, has a tangle with the Chinese on some contested islands. So the US is very much integrated into the if this threat blows up. Then there is a new US Japan, Republic of Korea trilateral tie on security since April 2023, which elevates defense cooperation, mainly and clearly targeting North Korea and China, and nullifies earlier kind of agreements to lower tensions. Then there are these plurilateral militarized platforms like the AUKUS, that is Australia, UK, and the US, which are going to provide nuclear submarines to Australia. There is a Quad between US, Australia, Japan, and India for maritime security. Then there was a security pact between China and the Solomon Islands in 2023, which has led to counter-security pacts and economic deals with the US and 3 Pacific islands of Papua New Guinea, Palau, and Micronesia. Now, in addition, the US has, along with their allies, interoperability clauses with several Indo-Pacific countries with integrated defense, bilateral memorandum on enhanced defense cooperation, logistics exchange agreements, like the US-Philippines Mutual Defense Treaty, which can see the US intervening along with or making Philippines a proxy if there's any possible conflict with China. A similar logistics agreement with India, which was signed much earlier. Then there's an opening up of a liaison office of NATO in Japan, which partners with New Zealand and South Korea. Then there is, of course, the US Pacific Command with regular exercises. Now, besides this, there is a counter-militarization from Russia and China, who see all this as a threat. And so this usual threat escalation is now moving into the Indo-Pacific region, somewhere where NATO does not have a mandate to enter. So really, that is why we need to resist NATO, and that is why all strength and support to NATO, No to NATO campaign. Thank you.
Greetings of peace and solidarity to everyone. Gabriela stands before you today with deep concern and firm resolve as we speak out against the growing imperialist aggression being waged under the banner of the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO, led by the imperialist United States. From its creation during the Cold War up to its current role in the conflict in Ukraine and Asia-Pacific tensions, NATO has never been a force for peace. It is an instrument of US imperialist domination, designed to secure not only military supremacy, but more importantly, economic control over nations and resources around the world. Its wars and interventions are not for freedom or democracy, but for opening markets, capturing natural resources, and protecting large profits of multinational corporations. Wherever NATO goes, devastation follows, followed quickly by foreign debt, privatization, and plunder. The Philippines, the Filipino women, and our people are not exempt from this cost. Through unequal military agreements like the Visiting Forces Agreement, Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, Mutual Defense Treaty, the Philippines has been dragged into NATO's orbit. The Philippines has been transformed into a forward base for US military interests in the Asia-Pacific region. Our land, seas, and people are being exploited in the US imperialists' efforts to encircle China, its imperialist rival, and maintain control of trade routes and strategic resources. Our communities have become staging grounds for US war exercises, our lands turned into military bases. What does this mean for Filipino women? It means rampant militarization in our rural communities, forcing indigenous women and peasant families off their ancestral lands to make way for foreign mining, agribusiness, and infrastructure projects. It means heightened risk of rape and sexual abuse and violence by foreign troops stationed on Philippine soil, like the case of Nicole and Jennifer Laude, and many more denied justice. It means more women pushed into forced migration as economic displacement deepens, only to face the perils of modern-day slavery, exploitation, and abuse abroad. It means that public funds meant for health, housing, and education are diverted to war preparations and arms sale. NATO's so-called Women, Peace, and Security agenda is a smokescreen. There can be no real peace if it is built on military domination and economic exploitation. No security in a world where women are treated as pawns in imperialist agendas. We say, not in our name, and thus we, in Gabriela, calls on all women and freedom-loving peoples of the world to resist US-led NATO's war machine. Let us assert our national sovereignty, oppose foreign military bases and imperialist plunder of our resources, and struggle for a just and lasting peace, one that uplifts women, protects life, and builds a future free from imperialist intervention and domination. Maraming salamat po. Makibaka, wag matakot.
Kia ora. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. My name is Liz Remiswal, and I'm honoured to speak with you today on behalf of Aotearoa New Zealand, World Beyond War, and the Pacific Peace Network. Before we begin, I want to briefly honour two extraordinary women from our region who recently passed away. Dr. Hannah Middleton, a stalwart of the Australian anti-basis movement, and Hilda Linney, a Pacific champion for peace, women's rights, nuclear abolition, and Indigenous justice from Vanuatu. May their spirits continue to guide our efforts. I also honour the ancestors and custodians of land around the world, those who lived in harmony with the earth and each other long before militarism disrupted that balance. Turning now to NATO. I wish I could bring better news from Aotearoa. Unfortunately, our government is taking alarming steps to deepen military ties under the guise of security. The only major voice of dissent among our women leaders has been former Prime Minister Helen Clark, who refused to support the illegal war in Iraq and now cautions against NATO expansion. By contrast, Jacinda Ardern, also a former PM, chose to attend NATO's 2022 summit in Madrid rather than the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in Rwanda, symbolically signalling where our diplomatic priorities lie. Most recently, our Minister of Defence, Judith Collins, attended the NATO Defence Ministers meeting and committed New Zealand to closer military collaboration with the so-called Indo-Pacific Four: Japan, South Korea, Australia and New Zealand. This move is framed as a response to a perceived alliance of Russia, China, Iran and North Korea. Minister Collins has also committed to boosting New Zealand's defence budget to 2% of GDP, promising an extra 12 billion New Zealand dollars to the military, money that could have been used to address poverty, housing, health or the gender pay gap. Now our current PM, Christopher Luxon, is heading to NATO meetings this week. This comes as his government slashes public spending, undermines Māori rights and fails to address growing inequality, all while drifting closer to military alliances that threaten our independence and escalate regional tensions. Despite New Zealand's proud nuclear-free stance and our 1980s stand against ANZUS, we're now being drawn into AUKUS Pillar 2, preparing to support interoperability for nuclear-powered submarines, a move that risks aligning us with war plans against China, our largest trading partner. It's not just tragic, it's reckless. Meanwhile, more than 30,000 troops from 19 countries are gathering in Australia and Papua New Guinea for Talisman Sabre War Games, a massive militarised show of force on land and sea. Participating nations include the US, Canada, Germany, India, Japan, Indonesia, South Korea, Philippines, Singapore, the UK and more. And these alliances often ignore war crimes such as the genocide in Gaza, and continue the legacy of colonial violence. But we are not silent. Just this past weekend, World Beyond War and the Pacific Peace Network launched a petition calling on all Pacific governments to stay neutral and stop preparing for war in China, with China. We will present this petition to the United Nations and national parliaments, and I ask you all to sign and share it in your own countries too. I hope that Pippa will share the link in the chat. We continue to speak out, and that resistance breeds hope. Last month in Sydney, we joined peace groups at a military-sponsored space summit opposing the militarization of space under the banner Keep Space for Peace. In solidarity with the Knitting Nanas, the Trade Union Choir and many others, we sang, we stitched and we stood firm despite new laws restricting protest. Though denied loudspeakers, our giant peace banner flew high and clear. We will keep going. We will build relationships. We will nurture life, protect Papatūānuku, and resist the destruction of our world by forces that only know how to dominate. To all of you, women peacemakers, carers, truth tellers, I send you love and strength. Though I can't be there in person, I'm so glad that Dragana is there to represent Australasia and the Pacific. Take care of one another, keep speaking out. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Comrades, friends, siblings in struggle, for decades, NATO, a US-led transnational machinery of violence, power, domination, and destruction, has devoured life on Earth, leaving behind a trail of bombed homes, dismembered communities, and broken and lost futures. NATO is an imperialist war alliance. It exists to defend capital, borders, and hegemony. It is a continuation of a long history of colonialism. Like all forms and institutions of militarism built on the backs of the poor and the oppressed, NATO is deeply rooted in a long history of patriarchy. The history of NATO's policies against people's struggles around the world, its permanent expansion of military capacity, has always taken a massive toll on women and all oppressed dissident genders. Whether through direct state and army violence or through the help of reactionary proxies, such as the Contras in Central America during the so-called Cold War, or more recently, Islamist fascists in the Middle East, NATO violence, overt and covert, is responsible for mass murder, rape culture, deep societal divisions, and the destruction of indigenous communities and lands. Only in the last years in Kurdistan alone, NATO violence executed by a member state, Turkey, has been synonymous with political feminicide. Sakine Cansız, Fidan Doğan, Leyla Şaylemez, Zehra Berkel, Hebul Melek Khalil, Emine Weisi, Nagihan Akarsel, and Cihan Bilgin are just a few among many Kurdish women revolutionaries, politicians, educators, community leaders, and journalists murdered by NATO bullets and drones. These women were targeted precisely because they embodied hope, resistance, and life. NATO states, moreover, fully back the ongoing genocide in Palestine, as well as the many other attacks and wars and genocides in the Middle East and beyond. Meanwhile, through concepts like women, peace, and security, NATO is trying to purple wash and pink wash its image. These are attempts to further militarize women, to diversify the face of oppression, and to increase the number of people used as cannon fodder for imperialist wars that only serve elite interests. We must resist these psychological manipulations and expose them as the propaganda that they are. The world must know that for the global majority, NATO has meant ecocide, genocide, feminicide. NATO is not only tanks and drones. Its policies also manifest as borders, imposed colonial debt, prisons, sanctions, and psychological warfare. While NATO continues its warmongering abroad, causing millions of people to flee from the consequences of war, domestically NATO member states criminalize those who take action against war and for peace. In the past 2 years alone, tens of thousands of mostly young people have faced police brutality in prison for resisting militarist policies conducted in their name. Already, wars are being fought over resources needed to build the so-called green infrastructure primarily for the global north. We will see a massive greenwashing of NATO imperialism in the coming years. This is an occasion for the climate movement to further embrace anti-imperialist principles. The steadfastness of Palestinian mothers in Gaza, of Afghan women resisting the Taliban, which is another output empowered by imperialist policies, of Filipinas fighting against US bases in their lands, are all examples of the beauty and power of society-based resistance. Refusing to be divided by borders or ideologies designed to weaken our solidarity and common struggle, we urgently need to construct a radical, revolutionary peace, built from below, by the hands of those who have suffered and resisted the most. Peace is not the absence of conflict, but the clear presence of justice. It is the dismantling of every structure that profits from our deaths. A world without NATO is not only possible, it is clear, perhaps now more than ever, that only a world without NATO is possible. Together we can work towards an international tribunal to expose the feminicidal nature of NATO. Down with imperialism, long live international solidarity, long live the revolutionary women's struggle, freedom for all political prisoners.
Okay, Summit on Why Women Must Resist NATO. To be presented at the Global Women United Against NATO Summit, released on the 21st of June 2025. Red salute, comrades. World War III is not looming. It is not hypothetical. It is here. It is now. It is unfolding daily as a lived global process for attritional warfare, economic strangulation, psychological warfare, and naked military aggression. This is not a war of defense. It is a war of domination, a war of imperialist aggression, a war waged by NATO, by the United States and their junior imperialist partners. It is a war against the rising tide of anti-imperialist resistance against national liberation movement, against socialist revolutions. It is a war of strange multipolarity, a war of reverse national sovereignty, a war to preserve the rotting carcass of US monopoly capitalism. Comrades, let's be clear. Imperialism is not just warlike. Imperialism is war. It is the highest and final stage of capitalism, marked by monopolies, dominated by finance capital, driven by militarism. In this phase, militarism globalizes itself through NATO, AFRICOM, and the web of proxy wars. From Ukraine to Gaza, from the Sahel to Taiwan, from the Red Sea to the Caribbean, imperialism strikes and spreads like a virus. But with every strike, it provokes resistance. With the very base it builds, it digs into the grave, into its own grave. This is the dialectic of history. From the NATO-provoked war in Ukraine to the genocidal Zionist siege of Gaza, from the encirclement of China to the provocation of the Korean Peninsula. The pattern is clear. Imperialism is on a warpath, not for peace, not for security, but for profit, plunder, and hegemony. Kenya is not neutral. Kenya is not on the sidelines. Kenya is a battlefield. The United States maintains 3 non-military bases within Kenyan borders. AFRICOM advisors sit in our military command. Our sovereignty is infiltrated. Our independence is mocked. We are being used, like many African nations, as a rare base for imperialist strategy in East Africa and in the Indian Ocean. The bases are not partners in security. They are outposts of occupation. They do not protect us. They chain us. They do not train us. They program us. They do not aid us. They subdue us. On Africa is already a battlefield in the World War III. Why do we say it so? Not only in the Sahel, where French and US forces retreat in disgrace, not only in Sudan or the Congo, where imperialist proxies spill blood, but in our minds, in our schools, in our economies. Our sovereignty is auctioned by comprador regimes. Our youth are fed imperialist dogma. Our future are shackled by IMF chains and the dollar system. But this war is not like the last. The First and Second World Wars were, and the First and the Second World Wars were between imperialists for the redivision of colonies. This war is different. This is a just war. A war for national liberation, a war for popular sovereignty, a war that across many continents is increasingly socialist in its content. In Gaza, we do not see only a national struggle. We see frontline in the global fight against fascism. In Donbass, we see resistance to NATO's expansion. In Yemen, we see the peoples rising against Gulf puppets and US domination. Comrades, the war is winnable. The enemy is not invisible. The imperialists are fractured, fearful, faltering. The contradictions within imperialism have matured. The crisis of capitalism has deepened, and the ruling class, the North, quarrel amongst themselves. They panic over the dollarization, they drown in debt, they scramble under the weight of their own lives. Imperialism is entering its final phases, and World War III is its final convulsion. But even as the empire burns abroad, it prepares the battlefield at home, in our barracks, in our skies, in our ports, and through the poisonous doctrines of neocolonialism. Let us name the enemy clearly, comrades. AFRICOM is the military sphere head of US imperialism on the continent. Discussed in the language of security cooperation, it is militarized nearly all of Africa, operating in 53 out of 54 states, maintaining over 29 known facilities from Djibouti to Ghana, from Manda Bay to Agadez. Kenya is among its most entrenched collaborators, but history breaks open. In Niger, the people expelled the invader. The revolutionary military shut down the US base at Agadez. This is not ordinary event. This is the birth of a new Africa. Through rupture, resistance, and armed defiance, AFRICOM has suffered a historic blow. Kenya must follow suit. AFRICOM is not a partner in peace. It is a command center of conquest. Its mission is the protection of imperialist assets, oil pipelines, shipping lanes, and comprador puppets. Its goal is to suppress any African assertion of sovereignty. In Kenya, the US extends its grip through 1. Manda Bay naval base, used to wage war in Somalia. 2. Isiolo and Laikipia air bases, under shared jurisdiction for drone warfare. And 3. Deep intelligence integration, rendering the NIS subordinate to US Cyber Command. These are not defensive agreements. These are occupation treaties. They force Kenya to become a launchpad for US aggression in the Indian Ocean against China and against progressive forces in the region. Our police are sent to Haiti and Somalia not for Pan-Africanism, but as imperial proxies in blue helmets. Behind this militarization stands the comprador bourgeoisie, the managers of the neo-colony, the auctioneers of the sovereignty, the state house to treasury, from barracks to boardrooms. They kneel to NATO-backed interest in the name of development and cooperation. Let us call things by their names, comrades. The comprador state is an agent of empire. The Pan-African peace and security architecture is held hostage by imperial aid. Our diplomacy is shackled to the European Union. And thus, the Revolutionary Women League joined the global cry. 1. To dismantle AFRICOM. 2. To shut down all US and NATO military bases and on African soil. 3. To break all status of forces agreements. And 4. Expel all the foreign military personnel. 5th, nationalize our military industrial infrastructure. And lastly, to reorient our defense forces towards the people and not profit. Comrades, militarization is not accidental. It is the inevitable companion of capitalist crisis. As dollar hegemony declines and trade routes realign, Africa becomes the imperialist prize, strategically, logically, and militarily. From the Horn of Africa to the Gulf of Guinea, from the Sahel to the Red Sea, a new resource war of plenary proportion has begun. But every imperialist expansion carries the seed of its negation. In the Sahel, military ruptures against French occupation. In Sudan, internal contradiction within foreign-backed armies. In Ethiopia, a people's refusal to kneel. These are not yet revolutions, comrades, but they are tremors, and tremors foreshadow earthquakes. Let us organize, comrades. Let us radicalize. Let us prepare to turn tremors into upheaval. Long live the National Democratic Revolution. Long live forward to defending our defense sovereignty. Forward. And down with NATO, down with AFRICOM, down with imperialism. Long live the internationalist solidarity, long live the Revolutionary Women League. Yours in solidarity, Winnie Obiero, the Secretary for the Revolutionary Women League. Thank you.
Greetings of solidarity, of hope, of love. I would like to express my solidarity and my support to women all over this burning world, to marginalized groups. And I would like to especially send my solidarity to the women of Gaza, the women of Iran, the women of Afghanistan, the women of the Democratic Republic of Congo, the women of Yemen, and many others. I want to focus my intervention on Sudan, where I'm from, because it's not getting as much attention as it should. Sudan has witnessed chronic war, but over the last 2 years, it has been witnessing a war that I see as not a political struggle, but as part of a larger imperialist struggle, mainly facilitated by growing imperialist force in the Middle East, the UAE, and supported by NATO alliances, or the NATO alliance, which supports this country, empowers it, and looks at it as an ally and as an implementer of its foreign policy in the Middle East. Sudan, 1/3 of the population of Sudan is now displaced, living as IDPs or living as refugees in neighboring countries and beyond. And most of them are women and children. Until now, we do not know the fate of hundreds of women who have been disappeared, who have been kidnapped, mainly by paramilitary support that is facilitated and supported and empowered to carry out this imperialist project. Hundreds of women or thousands of women have been forced into forced prostitution, have been taken in as sex slaves, have been detained, have been basically subjugated to the most, or subjected to the most horrendous crimes and violations. Many of them are now missing. Many of them have been gang raped. Many of them have been found in graves that were recently dug up. We don't know the fate of many of them. And this is just what we know right now. There's a lot that we don't know. What we do know is that they want to subjugate the people of Sudan. They want to displace all of us. They want us to really just submit to this imperialist project, to ensure that they take our resources, that they exploit our land, and we are just basically enslaved, and we are just employed to work on the minefields and on the farmlands for this imperialist machine. But they were surprised because the people of Sudan have been very resilient, have been very resistant of this, of this project. They have been fighting very hard against it. They have been trying to do a lot against it. Women have been working at the grassroots level to make sure that their communities are safe and fed and are kept alive, basically. So because just staying alive is a form of resistance right now during this war. We want support, and we want people to know about what's happening, and we want people to look at it beyond this political struggle that is being told in the mainstream media. This is an imperialist war.
Mesdames et messieurs, je suis Cyril Hollande Béchon. Je vous parle depuis le Cameroun, où je travaille comme défenseur des droits humains depuis plus d'une quinzaine d'années. Je participe à cette campagne pour décrier l'OTAN. L'OTAN est une machine de guerre que nous devons arrêter. Nous devons l'arrêter parce que la guerre ne crée que désolation, désespoir et tristesse. La guerre ne construit pas, la guerre détruit. Nous sommes tous engagés à la construction de nos États, donc l'OTAN ne nous aide pas. Après la Deuxième Guerre mondiale, la Société des Nations, qui a été plus tard transformée en Organisation des Nations Unies, avait pour seul et unique objectif et vision la construction d'une cohabitation pacifique entre les nations du monde. Malheureusement, au lieu de bâtir cet idéal commun, n'est-ce pas, mis dans le cadre du Pacte des Nations Unies, les États ont plutôt cherché, ont trouvé des alternatives, n'est-ce pas, pour entretenir et faire renaître les machines de guerre. Ces machines-là ont vu le jour sous de nouvelles appellations comme l'OTAN. Ladies and gentlemen, NATO has developed its tentacle everywhere, including in Africa, to protect its Mediterranean area. NATO has threatened militarism in Africa. With the rise of militarism, we must fear the perpetuation and multiplication of conflicts with their consequences, the decline of democracy and the impact on the rule of law, the strengthening of autocracy and military regime, the unequal distribution of national wealth, the increase of poverty and inequality. Mesdames et messieurs, les Africains aspirent à l'autonomie, à l'indépendance, à l'affranchissement de la colonisation et de la néocolonisation. L'OTAN, c'est le nouveau visage de l'hégémonie. Et le monde n'en a plus besoin, l'Afrique aussi. Les citoyens africains que nous sommes, nous disons non à l'OTAN. Nous disons oui au désarmement, oui à l'ouverture des frontières, à la libre circulation des hommes et des biens. Oui à l'investissement dans la paix, à l'investissement dans la terre, dans l'environnement. Nous disons oui à la pacification des rapports entre les États du monde, bien entendu, entre les États africains aussi. Merci.
Thank you. You just said power to the people. Africa, it carries rhythm, it carries sound, it carries movement, joy, dancing, all that is in its soul. It understands the relationship with earth and people. It carries deep scars and generational wounds that need tending and investment in its healing. But I dare say that it cannot get its answer from Western ideology. I see it as the continent that taught the world Ubuntu. Therefore, we Africans need to divest from any NATO idea that war is peace and that we need to murder our neighbors to maintain regional stability. NATO and USA's favorite lie. More than anyone, we understand how the propaganda machine crunches out rhetoric and then targets our nation with famine and war, creating smear campaigns and assassinating our revolutionaries. This is why I caution all African nations to never take the bait. Although Congo has been targeted already and other nations having been already bombed and suffering from generational economic subjugation. I'm not going to give you the stats. There's plenty that you can check it out. Coming to my own nation, South Africa, a hero to many in the world, I'm afraid for them. And I'm afraid for their future, as they seem to have caught the eye of the United States of America. Elon Musk has weaseled his way with his Starlink into our coffers. And Donald Trump has declared our historically advantaged citizens to be victims of racial profiling and genocide. Whilst our generationally disadvantaged community remains the poorest of the poor, and South Africa has gotten the title of most unequal nation on planet Earth. His disrespect for us is so profound and obvious that he doesn't even know the difference between Congo and South Africa. Oh, God. He doesn't know the difference between a memorial and an actual grave. So African nationals cannot possibly take his directives to us seriously. My message to other Africans is to divest and boycott anything USA and Israel related. Yes! Let's be honest, Africa. Brown bodies are the commodity upon which empires have been built. They carry no value to empire. That is why Palestinian bodies are destroyed with impunity, and the powers that be can continue their human crunching machines without batting an eyelid. Do not give the USA Simonstown, South Africa, as a naval base, and do not give Colesberg to Elon Musk so he can spy on us on behalf of the USA. As for the economic punishment that has been engineered during this time, it should never stop us from being a voice against the regime. Today, I remember Mama Winnie Mandela, who kept the revolution alive when her husband was behind fascist bars. It's the women who continue to carry the nation when our men are taken prisoner or murdered in killing fields. It's the women like Ma Naledi Pandor who spoke up in the face of threats against her life and those of her loved ones, but continued to rage against the colonial machine on behalf of Palestine, which resulted South Africa taking Israel's regime to the ICJ. We have a voice. We will not be silenced. African women matter. We have been through colonizations, raped by the colonialists, been placed on display for our anatomy, to be poked and prodded and sexually abused until we die from their filthy diseases. If you don't believe me, read up on Sophie Bartman. It is us who are the birthplace of humanity. We are not afraid to raise our voices to stop NATO from using us to murder each other and other nations. We divest from empire and colonialists and refuse their murdering of our children and the children of other nations whose only crime it is to stand up against the regime. Africa is the birthplace of humanity, and perhaps it is the place that will teach the world to live again.
I heard about nuclear weapons that we'd got rid of from Lakenheath, which is an American base. It's supposed to be an RAF base, but it isn't, it's USAC. It's in Suffolk, and we got rid of, not me personally, I wasn't involved in the campaign at the time, but CMD waged a fantastic campaign locally, nationally, globally to get the American nukes got rid of. And now they're coming back, which is absolutely outrageous. I've got a few handouts here, which, be free to pass them around. But what I would really like you to do is to have a look on the website, what came out of the CND outrage about nukes coming back to Suffolk. Was some Greenham Common women came out of retirement along with Aldermaston women and women from Fast Lane and everywhere. And I'm sure I'm going to mention a name that will be familiar to all of you, Angie Zelter, who is a nuclear power in her own right. She is still very active on the nuclear movement. And she's had the idea of forming a specific action group
to deal with this issue, and it's the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace. We've already got, I think, about 200 groups signed up, and we're attracting not just anti-war and anti-nuclear groups, but we're attracting environmental groups. Exile Peace are signed up to it, because as we're all aware, this is affecting the planet on lots and lots of different issues. So the Lakenheath Alliance for Peace was formed about 2 years ago, when we first heard about the nukes coming back, and a small group of us have made countless trips to the Lakenheath base and asked to speak to the base commander. That's not happened yet. Last year, in 2024, we organised a peace camp, actually outside, right at the base, and it worked very, very, very well. And we've done the same again this year, and it was much bigger and much better. And I know some of you also. Yeah, and also at the same time we had an international peace conference in a tiny little village called West Road that even people in Suffolk have never heard of. And we filled the room with 100 people from literally all over the world. Some of our speakers this evening were there, so we've had fantastic support. And my message to you now is that we're trying to get a massive protest organised at Lakenheath for 5,000 people plus. So if you want to protest about nukes, come to Lakenheath. Have a look at the website, sign up, give your support and spread the word. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I will be very short. I am an eco-peace activist since a long time, so I share very much what was said about the military emissions and the military pollution. Since the beginning, Italy was a very servant member of NATO. We participated to all NATO wars and all the wars made by some members of NATO. We never missed any war since 1991. So it's really a shame, but it's like that. I remind that the UN Charter says that the countries which can enter the United Nations are the peace-loving countries. Do we have peace-loving countries? Not in NATO, unfortunately. Look also at not only the Western countries, but also Turkey. So we know very well. But in spite of many protests, because Italian people are always in the streets, they should do more. But for instance, on Saturday, yesterday, there were 100,000 people in the streets against the rearmament. But the good news, I could not really verify, but the good news is that our Minister of Defense, who is a rightist and involved also in the armament companies, he said that now the things are changing. So there is no space for NATO. I mean, there is no why NATO would. So follow our Minister of Defense. You will have some surprise.
So I'm going to talk a bit about the situation in Germany, because everything is falling apart here. You probably heard the German Chancellor Merz has justified the invasion or the war of aggression against Iran, which violates international law, with his sentence, Israel would just do the dirty work for us, and has now obviously buried international law with that. The cynical support of several Western governments today for the next US war of aggression against Iran in violation of international law makes this even more obvious. The German government and its supporters in the olive green and FDP parties are terror supporters with their politics. Basically, the Israeli government, as well as most NATO governments, have ignored international law for much longer, but they had at least tried to give their one-sided enforcement of interests a legal cover with R2P, or rules-based order. That's all over now. Only the law of the jungle prevails, which hopefully won't take us back to the Stone Age. After all, there is already a criminal complaint against Mr. Merz and a call for his resignation because justifying a war of aggression is punishable offense under German law and is preparing for it or calling for it. However, it is questionable whether Germany still functions as a constitutional state. Unfortunately, for several years now, people from the peace movements have been defamed, marginalized, and even prosecuted for speaking out in favor of a return to friendly relations with Russia or demonstrating against Israel's genocide against the Palestinians. There are bans on traveling, professional bans, entry bans, the freezing of assets, and most recently, even direct arrest warrants against two people because of their humanitarian aid to children in Donbas and Luhansk. One of these people affected is a colleague of mine on the board of the German Peace Council. The whole operation, which was prepared and accompanied by the media, was obviously primarily aimed at intimidating the peace movement in Germany. So our democracy and freedom are threatened above from within. A reactionary, authoritarian, and militaristic reorganization of the state may be propagated by the right, but it is being implemented by CDU, SPD, Olive Greens, and FDP in Germany. Where are all the insights from the Enlightenment, humanism, and the lessons learned from the Second World War, which brought so much death and destruction? Labels such as good, evil, us versus the others are to be fundamentally rejected from a humanist tradition. Where are reason, prudence, appreciation of creation of this wonderful world, whose greatest plague is always the people who think that war brings anything other than destruction? Destruction of life, resources, the environment, nature, the rule of law, etc. With the Italian Defense Minister Corsetto, one more person has finally understood NATO is a long outdated, brain-dead, obsolete, dangerous war alliance that violently enforces one-sided Western power interests and should have dissolved long ago together with Warsaw Pact. Because as a highly armed and unscrupulous instrument of power that will do anything to hold on to its existence, NATO is the greatest threat to our security in Europe and worldwide. Our interest as Europeans can only be to live in prosperity and peace amongst each other, our neighbors, including Russia. It can, of course, never be in our interest to have another big war. So whose interests do these EU governments clamoring for armament and preparation for war represent? Certainly not those of their people, the European citizens, of us. I was just in Moscow last week. Nobody there wants war either, just to live in peace. The situation is that the US administration has now realized that the unipolar world order is over. But even if it accepts a multipolar world order, its aim is to lead it, and it has little other means at its disposal than its military power and using it unscrupulously. The British and most EU governments seem almost as dangerous, as they are completely caught up in their own inability and unable to admit it or take a step back. They would rather tear down everything that was once considered as European achievements, such as freedom from war, freedom from need, freedom of expression, and peaceful European integration, than admit their own mistakes. The UK, Germany, and France are in economic decline and want to take refuge in a war economy. All these countries lack the idea of themselves as well as of a European Union that seems to formulate its definition and common ground only in being against Russia without realizing that it is amputating itself in the process, because European integration can never succeed without Russia. Our independence and sovereignty is being absorbed by the US dominating mechanisms of NATO, the US internet big data and information platforms like Google, Amazon, Facebook, Apple, called GAFA, as well as the far too great dependence on US capital and markets. After Canada and Greenland, Trump will probably formulate his idea of integrating Western Europe into the United States next. However, nationalism as a counter movement is not the solution either, but rather leads to mental narrowness. The dream, our dream, of a peaceful unification of the European continent as an independent neutral player and bridge between East and West seems more distant than ever now, and yet right now it would be exactly what is needed for a peaceful transition to a new world order. On the other hand, there is a threat of nuclear annihilation because the category of thinking itself seems to have changed, so that nuclear weapons are no longer seen as a nuclear deterrent, but their actual use is increasingly to be found in the strategies of insane politicians who do not understand that they are triggering the destruction of all life on this planet. It goes without saying that we have therefore long been in an information war, in which established media no longer provide objective information. The best example is the war propaganda about the non-existent Iranian nuclear bomb, or the lie that Iran wants to attack Israel. You have to find objective information by yourself. This is still possible, thanks to alternative media platforms, but work is already underway to either regulate, take over, or switch them off. Let's appeal to common sense for the upcoming NATO summit, even if the chances are slim. The first step needs to be a clear rejection of Ukraine or any other country joining NATO. The eastward expansion, which is the cause of the rift between transatlanticists and Eurasians on our continent, must be reversed. Instead of rearmament, we need disarmament, starting with nuclear weapons, an end to nuclear sharing, the withdrawal of all US nuclear weapons from Europe instead of new missile deployments, and nuclear weapon-free zones in the Middle East and Europe and beyond. The 50th anniversary of Helsinki offers the opportunity for a new conference on security and cooperation in Europe, which can dissolve NATO and create a new system of collective security, including Russia, so that Ukraine is no longer misused as a battlefield. Thank you.
So, dear global women for peace united against NATO, dear friends gathered in The Hague to protest against the world's by far biggest war machinery, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, that with extreme post-Cold War hybris is making all-out efforts to assist the US in conquering a position of full-scale world dominance with total lack of respect for the rest of the world and for multilateralism. In today's gloomy and extremely scary world situation, we need each other more than ever in our shared struggle and unwavering hope for a world in peace. I'm therefore very happy to greet you from the Arctic, and very unhappy not to be able to greet you with a message from the North of peace, disarmament, and good East-West cooperation. The Nordic countries, figuring very high on international lists of democracy and freedom of expression, are frantically rearming, hardly accepting voices in the public sphere, protesting against this new neoliberal credo that weapons are the way to peace. Pacifist voices are being sidelined, cancelled, attempted, ridiculed, and even being labeled as traitors belonging to the other side. The war propaganda, not least the anti-Russia one, is heavy and blocks to a large degree people's access to the truth, even militarizing people's minds. The Arctic region's geographical proximity between the great powers
and expanded access to a wide range of natural resources due to global warming causes increased interest and tension. The geopolitical situation has worsened dramatically by the Swedish and Finnish entry into NATO and the significant expansion of the number of US bases in the Nordic countries. Bilateral agreements have been signed for 47 American bases, so-called joint areas, in the Nordic countries. In Sweden, 17, Finland, 15, Norway, 12, and Denmark, 3. Additionally, Norway has for many years been considered NATO's eyes and ears in the north, with sophisticated American surveillance and espionage installations in the air, on land, at sea, and probably also in cyberspace, allowed over time by shifting governments. The almost total servility towards the United States is difficult to understand. It is time to get out of this dangerous polarized situation with one-sided enemy images of each other that only serves the military industry and its profiteers, and at risk leading to a full-scale Third World War. Militarization must be reduced and diplomacy and cooperation supported. In this context, the Arctic Council, the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and UN are extremely important. Let us all refer effectively to the UN Charter on Creating Peace by Peaceful Means, to Olof Palme's Plan for Common Security, and Mikhail Gorbachev's dream of a common nuclear-free European home. And let us make sure that NATO's paragraph 13 be used. It indicates how to leave the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It is actually easy. After a year of membership, just inform the government of the US and they will inform the others. Instead of the old patriarchal model of economic growth, militarism, competition, and confrontation with warfare over welfare, we acutely need to sharpen our strategic tools and instead build trust, international cooperation, solidarity, and a cultural peace. We actually need a feminist, humanistic, non-violent, and forceful revolutions. Friends, let us do it. Thank you.
Everybody must buy the goods from other countries, from other people. It's not a way, it's a colonialistic way just to go there and grab it. And not all goods of the world, of other countries and continents belong to the developed countries and developed world. So they must buy it. We must fight for this. I have been participating in several social organizations under the umbrella of the World Social Forum, and we found that we have to unite these issues, the social issues, the peace issues, and the ecological issues. All these organizations should unite and work together. There is a great need to paradigm changes in our lives because the way the economical life is organized, it should be changed. It can't go on the way it goes right now. All the regularly coming crises and also such crises which they never solve, which we take on our backs from generations to generations, like housing, austerity, working condition problems. There is no money, they say, for such problems, and there is actually not political will to solve this. They don't want to solve this. Immediately when they want to invest in arms, there is always money. They find somehow money for these. So from one side we suffer from these problems. On the other side, patriarchic and many places feudal capitalism is pushing the everlasting development with increasing speed. This type of you have to develop, you have to invent, and newer things, amongst it newer and newer arms. This ideology and this must be questioned. We have to slow down, take our time to think and reorganize all segments of our life and the structure of society. We are developed enough, but we are badly organized. To take factories, for instance, to the east and even more east seemed a very good idea, but actually they themselves realized that this was not a good idea. Trump now wants to take the factories back to US. To be global in the way of capitalistic logic, does not work for the benefit or for the good of the majority. The imperialistic, colonialistic, and very eyed and very hungry factors are in the process, so that the traditionally fields, territories of colonial robbing are not enough. Europe should be conquered, economically weakened, and taken under the dictatorship of self-proclaimed circles and very influential self-proclaimed circles. We must resist this. We have to contact our EU, European countries, those who are not in the EU, so all European countries should be part of an new EU organization, not of that we have today. I have to tell you one example. The Baltic countries in St. Petersburg made a conference, and I think we have to make such conferences every year to resist that demand that we don't have to talk with the non-EU European countries. We have to. Even if a provoked war is in our time, we have to go and talk to the Russians, Belarusians, and Ukrainians, Serbians, everybody. I would like to, could talk a lot more. One initiative I would like to put here, we every year remember the Hiroshima and Nagasaki tragedy, and I have to tell that the Yugoslavian, the war on the territory of Yugoslavia didn't end. There are people who are still alive and suffering, and there are children who were born with birth defects. So I think we should say the same way every year pay attention that this war is not over because these people are still suffering from the war. So every year we have to remember this. Thank you for your attention.
Nos toca ir también en el carro, pero nos da mucho gusto y mandamos un saludo desde el Observatorio de Derechos Humanos de los Pueblos y saludamos este importante encuentro de mujeres globales unidas por la paz contra la OTAN. Es un honor para nosotras estar aquí compartiendo nuestra palabra con ustedes. Estados Unidos consigue con la presencia de la OTAN en América Latina una mayor venta de armas, adoctrinamiento de militares latinoamericanos y reduce la presencia de Rusia y China. La estrategia se orquesta deliberadamente entre la OTAN y el Comando Sur de combate unificado de las fuerzas de Estados Unidos que cubre la región latinoamericana y es implementada desde la administración de George Bush desde el 2001 hasta el 2009, incluyendo operaciones de apoyo, entrenamiento, inversiones y capacitación. Esta expansión es impulsada principalmente por Estados Unidos, que busca ejercer control geopolítico y económico en la zona, a pesar de argumentar razones de seguridad y de defensa democrática. El interés estadounidense se centra en mantener su hegemonía y evitar la aparición de un bloque de poder alternativo que desafíe su dominio global. En los últimos años, la influencia y la intervención militar de la OTAN en la región han aumentado significativamente, tanto de manera directa como indirecta. América Latina, con sus abundantes recursos naturales y su potencial económico en crecimiento, podría ser un contrapeso importante a la hegemonía estadounidense y fortalecer las tendencias hacia un orden multipolar, por lo que uno de los principales objetivos de la expansión otanista es evitar este escenario. Por la fuerza bruta o el consentimiento de gobiernos apátridas en América Latina y el Caribe, ha devenido en la práctica una región militarmente ocupada. Basta de violaciones a nuestros derechos humanos colectivos como pueblos. No más impunidad. Alto a las masacres y a los genocidios. Fuera el militarismo y paramilitarismo de nuestros territorios. La militarización es la imposición por la fuerza, es el medio que utilizan los Estados Unidos y la OTAN, entre otros de sus aliados, para imponer su hegemonía, evitar el libre desarrollo de los pueblos y contener a los movimientos sociales que se resisten a estos fenómenos generados por la guerra. También, y de manera brutal, contribuyen a la destrucción ecológica en todo el planeta, siendo uno de los principales responsables del cambio climático. Uno de los principales aliados de los Estados Unidos, Israel, ha utilizado a Palestina como laboratorio para sus herramientas de ocupación y ha exportado sus tecnologías opresivas a todo el mundo. Por eso, los pueblos desde México nos unimos en todo el mundo contra el apartheid. Israel es un régimen sionista de ocupación que no solo practica el robo de las tierras palestinas, encerrando a millones de personas dentro de muros, destruyendo casa tras casa de las palestinas y palestinos, con la excusa de la seguridad y cometiendo un apartheid, sino también detiene a las dueñas y dueños originales de esta tierra, dejándoles sin juicio en las cárceles de ocupación. Israel ha impuesto una cultura necrófila de tierra arrasada para expandir su poder a través de la invasión, el despojo contra el pueblo palestino y otros pueblos. Todo lo anterior con la complicidad y apoyo total de Estados Unidos, la Unión Europea, la OTAN y otros actores más. El brutal genocidio que lleva 76 años cometiéndose en Palestina representa un atentado contra la dignidad humana. Por ello, como pueblos originarios desde México, nos unimos contra este modelo imperialista, colonial, racista, patriarcal, que ocupa, se adueña de nuestros bienes naturales y territorios. Ratificamos nuestro compromiso de lucha por la libertad plena, el fin del apartheid, la ocupación y el fin del genocidio que sufre el pueblo palestino, símbolo de dignidad y resistencia heroica. Ante un mundo plagado de injusticias y exclusiones, continuamos uniéndonos para su transformación y lograr constituirnos en un mundo capaz de reconocer la diversidad humana y hacer prevalecer la vida sobre la muerte y la destrucción. Queremos vivir en paz desde América Latina hasta Palestina y todos los territorios del mundo. Esto significa avanzar en la construcción de sociedades justas, guiadas por la solidaridad y plenas en sus capacidades para desarrollarse libres y soberanamente. Nuestro continente debe ser un territorio de paz, libre de bases militares y de armas nucleares. Desde el Observatorio de Derechos Humanos de los Pueblos, siempre defenderemos las banderas de la unidad y la integración de nuestra América Latina. Hacemos un llamado a desarrollar una campaña permanente por la paz, a manifestarnos en todos los rincones del mundo contra la guerra, por la paz, la soberanía y la autodeterminación de los pueblos. Nuestro proyecto es por la vida, la colectividad, el diálogo, el respeto a nuestra madre tierra, una paz con justicia social, dignidad y libertad, una paz que no se quede en las palabras, una paz que tenga amor y que construya, una paz sin violadores del derecho, una paz encarnada en la conciencia, una paz que dignifique a la existencia, una paz con dignidad. Muchas gracias, hermanas de todo el mundo.
She talked about she talked about the intense resource and land extraction that is coming from occupied land that happens in the experience of the people through massacres and genocide. They're calling for militarism out of Latin America. The US and its NATO allies are using Latin America to impose their hegemony, to contain movements of resistance and carrying out a brutal destruction of the environment. One of the key cases she talked about was Palestine, where Israel and its allies use Palestinians as a laboratory for destruction. They steal their homes, they take their land, and the people of the region in Latin America are uniting against Israel. She talked about how their homes are destroyed under apartheid conditions, and the original safekeepers of their land are being removed off of it. So who's responsible? The European Union, NATO, the United States, for all these years of genocide. And so indigenous people from Mexico are fighting an anti-patriarchal, anti-racist, anti-colonial fight, and they affirm their solidarity with the Palestinian people for dignity and resistance. This fight is really to preserve life. Resisting is just because we want a peace. Everyone wants to live in peace, from Mexico to Palestine, and to fight for sovereignty and independence. So it can't just be her organization, the Observatory for Human Rights of the People, Observatorio de los Derechos Humanos del Pueblo, calls for a permanent campaign for peace, where we manifest protest against war all over the world, for peace and dialogue, but not just a peace on paper, not just words, really peace with liberation, peace without human rights violations, peace with land, peace with dignity. And then she said, thank you, sisters.
Pertenezco al Centro de Amigos para la Paz, que es una organización interreligiosa cuyo objetivo es buscar la paz y la justicia social a través de los medios no violentos, de acuerdo con la filosofía y la práctica cuáquera, fundada en 1983 por cuáqueros, otros centroamericanos y estadounidenses residentes en el país. Ahí nada más quiero hacer comentarlos que los cuáqueros se establecieron en Costa Rica en 1950 en el contexto de la Guerra de Corea, con la convicción de salir de Estados Unidos, que salir de Estados Unidos era necesario por sus principios, porque no solo sus esposos, hermanos, hijos y nietos eventualmente serían orillados a servir a la guerra, sino que sus impuestos contribuirían a las guerras en el mundo. Era su visión desde 1950. Como saben, Costa Rica es un país conocido por su política de neutralidad y abolición del ejército desde 1948, por lo que el país no tiene bases militares propias ni alberga oficialmente bases militares de Estados Unidos ni de la OTAN. Sin embargo, debido a su posición geoestratégica y geopolítica en Centroamérica, desde nuestra perspectiva ha existido y existe una influencia de potencias extranjeras en nuestra región, incluyendo la posible presencia indirecta de intereses vinculados a la OTAN. Por esto, aunque no hay bases militares de la OTAN en nuestro territorio, existen acuerdos de cooperación en seguridad que muestran una influencia indirecta de la Alianza Atlántica en nuestra región, clara, ¿verdad? O sea, eso lo tenemos muy claro. La Constitución Política de Costa Rica en 1949 establece que el país no tendrá fuerzas armadas permanentes, lo que ha sido un pilar de nuestra identidad nacional e internacional. A pesar de esto, Costa Rica mantiene acuerdos de cooperación en seguridad con varios países, incluyendo Estados Unidos. Estos acuerdos se centran en la lucha contra el narcotráfico y el crimen organizado, no incluyen la instalación formalmente de bases militares extranjeras, pero estos acuerdos podrían ser un primer paso hacia una mayor militarización, tensan los límites de nuestra neutralidad y representan un riesgo permanente, aunque el gobierno insiste que son acuerdos técnicos sin compromisos bélicos. Ejemplos de esto en el contexto de cooperación de seguridad entre Costa Rica y Estados Unidos, el murciélago ha sido un punto de controversia. Se trata de una instalación de radar ubicada en la península de Nicoya que ha sido asociada con el monitoreo de narcotráfico y posibles operaciones encubiertas. No es una base de la OTAN, pero su operación con apoyo estadounidense refleja cómo Costa Rica intenta balancear la neutralidad con la necesidad de combatir el narcotráfico. Mientras no haya tropas extranjeras estacionadas, no se considera una violación a la abolición del ejército, pero sigue siendo un punto de debate porque no hay transparencia sobre los acuerdos con Estados Unidos. En esta instalación, aunque el personal costarricense opera el radar, ha habido denuncias de que agentes estadounidenses podrían tener acceso a la información recolectada y también esta instalación se ha usado para coordinar interdicciones marítimas con el Comando Sur de Estados Unidos. De la misma manera, hemos cuestionado el radar ubicado en el Pacífico, en la isla del Coco, que es un emblema en el tema de biodiversidad muy cerca de la isla Galápagos. Este radar fue financiado e instalado con el apoyo del Comando Sur de Estados Unidos en el marco de estos mismos acuerdos de seguridad para la lucha contra el narcotráfico y la protección de la biodiversidad. Sin embargo, los datos del radar podrían compartirse con agencias como la DEA, la CIA o el Comando Sur. No hay tropas estacionadas, pero sí ha habido visitas de asesores militares estadounidenses y en un escenario de conflicto, Estados Unidos podría usar la infraestructura para fines de inteligencia regional. Además de estos dos radares, existen dos radares adicionales, uno en Punta Urica y otro en Barra del Colorado. Todos los radares están en posiciones estratégicas, los cuales juntos forman una red de vigilancia financiada y asesorada por Estados Unidos. Se conoce, tenemos la información de que Estados Unidos ha presionado para tener mayor acceso a los datos de radares costarricenses y en 2022 se conoció que el radar de la isla del Coco podría integrarse a una red de vigilancia regional coordinada por Estados Unidos. Oponerse a las bases militares directas o indirectas, como las que tenemos nosotros de la OTAN, no es solo un acto político, es realmente una postura ética arraigada en la defensa de la vida y la dignidad. Las mujeres en nuestra diversidad encarnamos la resistencia a un sistema que prioriza la dominación sobre el cuidado colectivo. Nuestra lucha evidencia que la verdadera seguridad no surge de tanques y soldados, sino de sociedades comunitarias, sin desigualdades y libres de la violencia que ejerce el capitalismo sobre nuestras vidas y la vida de los nuestros. De verdad, les agradezco mucho que nos hayan invitado a estar acá. Para nosotros es un verdadero placer participar y seguirnos oponiendo fervientemente. Cuando se habla de Costa Rica se dice, pues aquí que hay mucha paz y que no hay bases y que no tenemos problemas, pero en realidad sí. O sea, en nuestras vidas está cruzado por todo lado esta influencia de la OTAN y por eso también decimos no a las bases militares. Muchas gracias.
Reciban mi abrazo fuerte y lleno de cariño para ustedes desde la Argentina. Para mí es un honor poder estar aquí en esta juntanza por la paz contra la OTAN, en este llamado de las mujeres a que nos opongamos a una máquina de destrucción masiva que es la OTAN. Desde Argentina no puedo dejar de señalar que conocemos muy bien qué significa la OTAN en la vida de las personas, de los pueblos. Como ustedes lo saben seguramente, en la Argentina hay una base militar de la OTAN enorme en la isla Malvinas, en la Gran Malvinas. Esta base militar cumple una función determinante en conservar, mantener y proteger un Estado colonial del Reino Unido de Gran Bretaña en nuestro país. Gracias a esa presencia, nuestros recursos estratégicos son expoliados y nuestro mar es contaminado y empobrecido, es saqueado. La base militar de la OTAN pone en riesgo la paz del Atlántico Sur y de todo el continente, pues es una base estratégica en todo el entramado de guerras de ocupación de la OTAN en el mundo. Argentina hoy es la muestra de que existe un laboratorio de la OTAN, un laboratorio que hemos calificado como un laboratorio de la muerte, de la guerra. Esas dos comandos de la OTAN, que uno de ellos se creó en el año 2003, uno es el comando de transformación y el otro es el comando de operaciones, funcionan los dos con profunda influencia en la Argentina. Y quiero decirlo rápido porque sé que tengo poco tiempo, pero no quiero dejar de mencionarlo. El comando de transformación de la OTAN habla en su página web, ustedes lo pueden leer, de dos ámbitos fundamentales para su trabajo de transformación de la OTAN, para enfrentar la seguridad de la OTAN, ¿no? Que es garantizar en realidad el colonialismo y la ocupación, el apartheid. Uno de ellos es el cambio climático y el otro es la guerra cognitiva. La Argentina hoy se explica en gran medida lo que nos está pasando de estar gobernados por un fascista, gracias a este proceso de guerra cognitiva a la que se ha visto sometida nuestro pueblo. Esta guerra cognitiva ayudó a que este laboratorio de guerra que hoy está en la Argentina haya tenido sus efectos positivos y este gobierno haya pasado de un estatus de aliado extra-OTAN, como es la Argentina desde el año 98, a haber solicitado formalmente la inclusión como socio global de la OTAN. Y acá quiero detenerme para describir la situación continental, brevemente. Como está dicho, todas las bases de la OTAN en nuestro continente están garantizando la existencia de las colonias de la Unión Europea en nuestro continente. Eso ya las hace ilegales. Eso ya las hace ilegales porque el colonialismo es ilegal. Naciones Unidas así lo declaró. Pero, además de garantizar el colonialismo en nuestro continente, la OTAN entiende que este es su patio trasero y debe disputarlo con China. Esta es una disputa que puede destruir a nuestros pueblos. ¿Por qué? Porque se ha incrementado la presencia militar de la OTAN. Colombia es socio global de la OTAN desde el año 2016, cuando firmó la paz con las FARC-EP. Esto lo pone en una situación sumamente delicada. Es importante que Colombia salga de este estatus, que abandone este estatus. Colombia no va a poder avanzar hacia esa paz total si es un socio global de la OTAN. Brasil es aliado extra-OTAN. Con Bolsonaro ingresó en el 2018 y la Argentina es un aliado extra-OTAN desde el 98. Entonces, aquí nos encontramos con el segundo escenario de este comando de transformación de la OTAN, que es el cambio climático, porque Colombia garantiza la gestión del cambio climático por la OTAN en el Amazonas. Y Brasil Y Argentina garantiza a la OTAN, esa presencia en Argentina de la OTAN, garantiza la gestión militar del cambio climático en la Antártida y el Atlántico Sur. Estamos hablando de que la Antártida es la reserva de agua del mundo y el Atlántico Sur es el mar más rico del mundo. Pero además es un espacio marítimo estratégico en cualquier tipo de guerra. Cuando hablamos de la lucha contra el cambio climático, sabemos muy bien que en los pueblos estamos clamando por justicia climática. Justicia climática es ante todo descolonización, desmilitarización. Descarbonización significa descolonizar y desmilitarizar. Pero la OTAN tiene hipótesis de conflicto y de trabajo frente al cambio climático y es solo militar. Porque lo único que se le ocurre a la OTAN para enfrentar el cambio climático es poner a funcionar sus fuerzas con baterías de litio o energía renovable. Pero con esas energías renovables va y destruye países enteros, Libia, Irak, Afganistán. Eso no es transformación. Eso no es enfrentar el cambio climático. No es descarbonizar la guerra. No implica justicia climática. Y esto es importante denunciarlo. La transformación energética no nos va a solucionar el drama del cambio climático, no a nuestros pueblos. Nuestros pueblos necesitan descolonización. Y la institución que soporta el colonialismo en el mundo se llama OTAN. OTAN. Desde lo profundo de mi corazón quiero decir Palestina libre. Desde lo profundo de mi corazón condeno el ilegal ataque de Israel y de Estados Unidos contra Irán. Están violando todas las normas internacionales que quedaban en pie. Necesitamos pensar un nuevo sistema internacional. Los pueblos tienen que clamar por un nuevo sistema internacional. Para terminar, quiero decir, como mujeres, desde Argentina, hemos comprendido que después de tantos años de lucha, hay algo que comprendimos, y es que todas las luchas tienen que unirse. Todas las luchas tienen que unirse. No podemos seguir luchando de forma fragmentada. Pueblos originarios, mujeres, comunidad LGTBQ+, todos separados, afrodescendientes, no. Tenemos que unirnos. El movimiento de mujeres debe hablar de cambio climático, debe hablar de OTAN, debe denunciar la guerra, como también los pueblos originarios deben hablar de mujeres, de todos los asuntos. Necesitamos construir un gran movimiento en defensa de la humanidad. De la humanidad. Quiero terminar mi intervención diciendo que la esperanza no podemos abandonarla. Que aunque estemos muy cerca quizás de una guerra atroz para la humanidad, el derecho de las futuras generaciones es un derecho que nos debe llenar de esperanza. Estar juntos hoy nos debe llenar de esperanza. Y hay grandes aprendizajes en la lucha de cada una de sus organizaciones, en cada uno de ustedes, en cada una de ustedes. Necesitamos contarnos esas experiencias, aprender de ellas, estar juntos y juntas mucho más tiempo, coordinar acciones. Con enorme gratitud les mando un abrazo muy grande, cariñoso. Y este encuentro me ha dado mucha esperanza.
So Paula's from Argentina, we just talked about it. yeah, she said we already introduced her. She said that they know what OTAN or NATO means in their lives because there's a NATO military base in the, how do you say it, Maldives? Malvinas, yeah, islands. And they say it's really there to conserve and protect a colonialism in the country because of the strategic place that it's in, but it's deeply contaminating the ocean, and it's one of the richest, the South Atlantic is one of the richest oceans in the world. So they're using Argentina again as a laboratory of death and war. There's expansion of that base, and there's two commands. One is operations and one is transformation, NATO transformation. And both of those are used by the fascist Argentinian government since it's a NATO ally. And then she talked a little bit about the Colombia and Brazil as other NATO allies in Latin America, and how they maintain colonialism there, and that NATO understands what it's doing. There's also a major climate impact. So on the one side, they say that they care about climate change and they have all these commitments on climate, but then they support war through NATO. So they're demanding, when you say you demand climate justice, you also have to demand demilitarization. And so we need a really great movement, a big movement in defense of humanity, and we can't abandon our hope because peace is our right, and we need to coordinate action and learn from each other. And because we're not alone, we can't forget about hope because we have each other.
Yeah. Well, first, let us, on behalf of all of us that live in the United States of America, give our apologies again to what our country is doing to this world, and particularly this morning again when the United States attacked Iran, and the complicity that the United States has had on the genocide in Gaza, the complete, total, whatever Israel wants, Israel gets. So we apologize for it. We work hard every single day in Washington and in other places in the United States to try to stop our Congress, our elected officials, our president from doing what they do, but we've not been successful. And our apologies for that. I'll mention I'm wearing a t-shirt that says, "For the children of Gaza." I'm also part of the Gaza Freedom Flotilla that's been sending ships to try to break the illegal Israeli naval blockade of Gaza. In 2008, the Free Gaza movement got 5 ships, actually, or little boats, into Gaza, and since 2008, we've been unsuccessful in getting boats into Gaza, but each time one of the 35 boats that we've sent has been on a mission, it has gotten publicity for what's going on in Gaza. The main thing for the running of these boats is to get more world attention on what the Israelis are doing to the people of Gaza. So it's a heavy heart that we today are recognizing that one more time the United States of America has broken international law, has killed, well, we don't know for sure if they've killed anybody yet, but that it wasn't because they didn't want to. But certainly the Israelis will complete that task for them. We hope that organizations such as No to NATO will be effective in stopping this worldwide military organization that is fostering mayhem throughout the world. And what NATO is doing here in Europe is just a small part of what they will be doing in Asia and the Pacific after this. Yes. I live in Hawaii. I'm a colonizer, a settler, colonizer of what should be the independent nation of Hawaii, but is part of the U.S. empire. Hawaii is one of the most militarized island groups in the world, with 5 military bases on the one island that I live on, and then a missile defense range on another island, and then a satellite system that's on a different island, and then the largest training area for the United States in the Pacific is located on yet one more island in Hawaii. We look at the territories of Guam, we look at Saipan, we look at Palau, we look at Micronesia, we look at the Marshall Islands. All of these nations, or all of these islands or territories are being super militarized now for what the United States over now 3 successive presidential administrations have said, the pivot to Asia. Well, the pivot to Asia is a terrible pivot that means not just, it's one thing to have economic competition, but it's another thing to say that that economic competition, and particularly when you're losing on it, which the United States is, that by golly, we'll just go after you militarily. And so this is why this whole thing of NATO and the NATO expansion to the Pacific is so important for us to recognize and to talk to our communities wherever they are about. So thank you all very much for coming all the way to The Hague today, and then all of our friends that are all over the world to participate with us as we say that global women united against NATO, no, global women for peace united against NATO. Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm Rhonda Romero, born in Hawaii. Know very much about the militarization of our islands, but by way of the Philippines. My family driven out of its country by U.S. colonization and the lack of being able to have a life for themselves because of the Philippines being a neo-colony of the United States, and now me living in the United States and fighting from within the belly of the beast, like all of you, to be free from U.S. military and war throughout the world. We're here today because, and we joined the Resist NATO coalition because we know that NATO is really just an arm of the U.S. war machine and U.S. militarism. One of the things that we put out is our anti-militarism agenda. And one of the top campaigns in it is to fight against U.S. military alliances. There are so many in the world. Our number one is NATO because of how wide-reaching it is and because it really is the most dominant one with all the G7 countries, except Japan, being part of it. Japan has a special relationship with it too. And how far-reaching its impacts are on the people. And so we have a campaign to resist NATO as this arm of U.S. militarization and war throughout the world. I'm just going to, because I want to be respectful of the time, I'm just going to read our statement so I don't go off track too much. The Resist U.S.-led War movement stands with the hundreds, actually, 10,000 people marching in the streets today and the millions worldwide protesting NATO's annual summit this year here in The Hague. Across the globe, people are rising up to demand the end of history's most aggressive imperialist war alliance, which is NATO. NATO functions as the armed wing of U.S. imperialism, masking wars of aggression as collective defense. Total bullshit, right? Since its founding, NATO, led by the U.S., has funded wars of aggression, covert military operations to destabilize countries, and increased militarization of its members. In the 1990s alone, U.S. and NATO led NATO to conduct several operations with this interest in mind, from direct intervention to protect U.S. oil interests in Kuwait and Iraq to the bombing campaigns in Yugoslavia. NATO's expansion and militarization have fueled the rise of far-right movements across Europe, which I think some people talked about earlier today, enabling xenophobia, racism, and state repression. While some right-wing parties may claim to oppose NATO, all of them, we know, push for higher military spending to profit from war, a hallmark of this alliance. NATO countries, no matter who the ruling party is, use their militarist agenda to suppress people's resistance by targeting oppressed people, migrants, and nations in the global south at the behest of the imperialist class. And I think all of the speakers from Latin America spoke directly to that point. NATO's impacts go far beyond the North Atlantic, as we were just hearing. In the 21st century, NATO has gone far beyond the North Atlantic, backing U.S. invasions and the 20-year occupation of Afghanistan. In 2011, it bombed Libya, killing at least 70 civilians. And more recently, NATO's aggressive eastward expansion and broken promises helped to trigger the 2022 Ukraine proxy war against Russia. NATO fully backs Israel, and we've all been saying that today, a major non-NATO ally through the Mediterranean Security Dialogue, providing it with military and political support. And its main suppliers of weapons to the Zionist occupation are all NATO members. NATO effectively supplies the bombs used against Palestinians, Lebanese, Yemenis, and Iranians in this Zionist war of settler colonial expansionism. Though some NATO states sanction far-right Israeli officials, all remain committed to protecting the Zionist entity. This strategy of imperial expansion aligns with NATO's broader NATO 2030 initiative launched at its 2021 summit to extend the alliance's global reach. Beyond reinforcing support for the Zionist entity, NATO is deepening military ties with Colombia, Jordan, Tunisia, and Kuwait while expanding missions in Iraq and courting Arab and Gulf states. And crucially, NATO has now declared both Russia and China as top security threats, justifying this whole militarized push into the Asia-Pacific, as Anne just said, boosting arm investments, war games, and alliances with repressive regimes like Japan and the Republic of Korea. But as we saw today, the people fight against NATO, and the majority of people across oppose more war, ballooning military budgets, and expansion of nuclear arsenals, and the construction of new bases, everything that NATO stands for. Because there cannot be any genuine peace in the world as long as NATO exists, the people have been waging resistance to NATO and US-led war. Marches, bike rides, die-ins, protests, concerts, many different forms of actions against NATO are held every year, year after year, and sometimes day after day. Counter summits like those held yesterday are held wherever NATO is. NATO cannot conduct its summits without the people waging resistance. The core of the resistance against NATO are those directly affected by its policies, its base expansion, and on the receiving end of the bombs that it drops, supplies, and deploys. People fighting for their national liberation by any means necessary also take up arms in self-defense, fighting against occupation and militarization of their communities. NATO's existence makes true peace impossible, so its defeat will be a victory for all oppressed peoples. Resist NATO and build just peace. Thank you.
Greetings. I'm Margaret Kimberly, and I'm speaking to you from New York City. I'm a member of the leadership bodies in the organizations the Black Alliance for Peace and the United National Anti-War Coalition. I thank the organizers of this event for inviting me to say, all over the world, women say no to NATO. Despite what I was told about the benevolent nature of NATO, member nations of this organization have committed many crimes, ranging from the destruction of the state of Yugoslavia to the destruction of Libya and the destabilization of governments around the world. This structure is a means of giving the US and its junior partners military and political power over the people of the world. It's interesting that the North Atlantic Treaty Organization has made the South American nation of Colombia a global partner. NATO has also claimed Africa as part of its southern neighborhood. Of course, we can also ask why there is a US military presence in South America or Africa at all. But there are more than 800 US and NATO military bases around the world. When NATO was founded in 1949, much of the global South was still under colonial control. The US and European nations such as Britain, France, Portugal, the Netherlands, which colonized much of the world, were all founding members. NATO is a relic of the Cold War, which supposedly ended with the collapse of the Soviet Union in the early 1990s. We were told that the world needed NATO for protection against the USSR and its Warsaw Pact allies. By that logic, NATO should have ceased to exist. but instead it has grown. Since 1999, former Warsaw Pact states such as Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, and the Czech Republic joined NATO, as have former Soviet republics Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia, along with the new states created from the destruction of Yugoslavia. Slovenia, North Macedonia, Montenegro, and Croatia, along with Albania, have all joined NATO. In addition, Sweden and Finland joined in recent years and gave up the neutrality that kept their countries safe and joined the dangerous and forever escalating proxy war in Ukraine. Colonial control is still the driving force behind NATO's existence, and Global South nations are not the only ones being colonized. Donald Trump is as strong a supporter of NATO as any other U.S. president. He differs only in demanding that member countries spend more money on their militaries, and they do as they are told. Europeans live under ever-worsening austerity, with their once strong welfare state safety nets being weakened as a result of expenditures on war-making. Of course, military spending is more than half of all budget expenditures in the U.S., and people here suffer as their needs go unmet. We've recently seen escalations in Ukraine, as Western nations openly said they would extend their attacks into Russia. The risk of a hot war between two nuclear-armed superpowers is only increasing. NATO is an offensive force, one that continues feeding the military-industrial complex and depriving people of their rights to self-determination. The U.S. Africa Command, AFRICOM, and all of the U.S. military command structure are designed to do just that. Whether Trump keeps AFRICOM as a standalone command is irrelevant. The goal is to keep African nations weak, with compromised leaders who will do the West's bidding. That is why the Alliance of Sahel States and the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré in Burkina Faso are viewed as such a threat. True independence for Africa and other peoples is not in the interest of the collective West. We must say no to NATO, which wreaks havoc from Northern Europe to Southern Africa. The existence of humanity and the planet depend upon our opposition to this dangerous structure. Thank you very much.
In June 2025, the Government of Canada announced a significant increase in defense spending to meet NATO's long-standing target of allocating 2% of the GDP to military budgets. This move has broad geopolitical implications, but equally important are the domestic, economic, and ethical consequences of this allocation of public resources. From a feminist perspective, this policy shift warrants deep scrutiny. NATO, on the surface, has embraced the women, peace, and security agenda, encouraging the participation of women in peace operations, diplomacy, and security policy making. Canada has played a leading role, resulting in a higher female representation within military and foreign policy spheres. This achievement, while important, should not be accepted without deeper scrutiny. Feminist scholars, particularly those from critical security studies, caution against the rise of militarized feminism, where gender inclusion is used to legitimize military power. This co-opting turns feminist ideals into strategic instruments, reinforcing rather than challenging patriarchal structures and systems of structural violence. More urgently, the Canadian government's pledge to increase military spending, potentially by tens of billions, will have real domestic consequences. Canadian feminist economists Armin Yeltsin and Isabel Baker remind us that military budgets crowd out social investments. Every Canadian dollar diverted to defense is a dollar not spent on subsidized childcare, affordable housing, healthcare, and public services. Programs disproportionately relied upon by women, especially racialized, low-income, and single mothers. There is also a profound contradiction between Canada's so-called feminist foreign policy and its alignment with military allegiance. Those interventions have often harmed civilian populations, especially women. NATO's reliance on nuclear deterrence and its history of involvement in conflicts with high civilian casualties raise ethical concerns. From a feminist perspective, true security is not achieved through weapons or war, but through sustained investment in human dignity, care, and social infrastructure. In conclusion, a feminist approach demands more than inclusion in militarized systems. It calls for a fundamental reimagining of security itself. Canadian security should not be defined by GDP spending targets or the size of an arsenal, but by social justice, accessible healthcare, affordable housing, quality education, and a livable planet. As Canada prepares to meet NATO's defense targets, feminist voices must insist that care, not coercion, define our public commitments. A future worth building is one where investment in peace and dignity take precedent over military alignment and armed deterrence. Thank you.
Canada, take the side of humanity, not hegemony. Greetings, global women, for peace, and thank you for your solidarity as we gather today to call for the abolition of NATO. As the coordinator of the Montreal, Canada chapter of World Beyond War, an abolitionist organization, I recognize that NATO is one of the pillars of militarism that has to be abolished in order to achieve lasting peace. Here in Canada, we had federal elections in May 2025, which coincided with a huge brouhaha because the US imposed heavy tariffs on Canadian goods and Trump was threatening to annex Canada as a 51st state. The new leader of the Liberal Party, Mark Carney, campaigned as a bulwark against US hegemony. Alas, once the elections were over, Canada recommenced pandering to the US's military delusions of conquest. For example, Trump is planning to build a Golden Dome, anti-missile shield in the images of Israel's Iron Dome, a sure sign that the US is preparing to attack other countries. And Trump has reported that Canada is negotiating to be protected by that dome. Although in actual fact, it is more likely that the trade tariffs are a way to strong-arm Carney into giving the US a loan for part of the costs, which are estimated to double the US's existing debt of $37 trillion. According to the World Beyond War's Mapping Militarism study, there are currently 16 wars in the world involving 45 nations. Of those, the worst 6 include the war in Myanmar, the war in Ethiopia, the war in Ukraine, the war in South Sudan and Sudan, the war in Palestine, now spreading into Syria, Yemen, and the rest of Western Asia, and the wars in over a dozen nations of North Africa. Canada will remain the US's sycophantic partner in war crime as long as it remains a NATO member whose military is deeply, deeply embedded in the US military. We are already, for all intents and purposes, a 51st state, at least militarily. Canadians routinely participate in US-led wars, and if ever the US were to declare war on Canada, our own military would be participating in bombing us. Canada still has some vestiges of what could be called anti-war and independent foreign policy. For example, Canada is a member of the International Criminal Court. Canada is party to the Convention on Cluster Munitions, while the US is not. Canada does not itself hold nuclear weapons. However, neither country is party to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and neither country recognizes the nation of Palestine, and that's very significant. To conclude, Canada has made a grave error in joining NATO and in throwing in its lot with violent and deranged nations. Our broken first-past-the-post electoral system creates short-term thinking in which two parties take turns ruling and sharing four-year terms. But if we had long-term vision, we would certainly understand that being a member of NATO is playing with the lives of our children and future generations in a form of Russian roulette, in which every year in which we remain a member of NATO brings us closer to nuclear Armageddon. We have to break away from the US militarily, ideologically, and embrace a new vision, well, actually an ancient indigenous worldview in which our collective humanity, not hegemony, is paramount. We're all brothers and sisters in a vulnerable planet, and there's room for all of us. But in the future, we must create. There's no room for hate, no room for war, no room for fascism, and no room for NATO. Thank you. Free Palestine.
But this was a very long session, but we did it on purpose, because many of these women are sitting in their regions and thinking, oh God, am I alone? Have I the strength to continue? And their voices are not heard. And if we would have had like a session with 10 speakers, having half an hour or 10 minutes or 20 minutes, the other women would not have been heard. And we know that some of the speeches were much longer than we actually thought in the beginning, because we said 3 to 4 minutes, maximum 5. But you saw how much they had to say. And they need this space. And that is why GWUAN, after this, must continue this. But then we have to concentrate on a region or an issue and have space also for the audience, for a floor is open. And have, again, a little bit longer, but not half an hour speeches, in order that we can connect all these women that are sitting there and giving them this feeling we are not alone. The next NATO summit will be held in Turkey. Wow. And that is quite a challenge. Yeah, you say, we go.
We go.
Okay, Marinella, you take us there. But it is a challenge because we had 2 women from Turkey in the very beginning with us. They are not anymore. I tried to get photos, no. But there is a very strong, of course, Middle East movement. And if we can join up with them, it's going to be great. And this is, of course, the question of, are we still alive?
Yeah, of course.
Or, which is a better, much better option, has the Italian defense minister got fed up with this outdated NATO and taken this article, was it 5, to get out. And this is Marinella took so little space here in her speech because she got afraid when I said we have to be short. And then you shortened it to nothing. But the main message was this, and now you have a task. Marinella promised that she would make a document, a letter to the defense minister and to the Italian members of parliament, that we suggest that they take this article to get out of NATO, and they have the support of
global women.
No, not only global women, all of our friends. I took it up with World Beyond War had a meeting there. And they have also sections all over the world. And of course, they have to see the document. But they said they would also circulate it. You saw at the beginning of the display, photo display, how many supporters' logos we had at the beginning. And that was made in like 5 days because we were running out of time. So if we have 2 weeks, we can get a lot of organizations behind it. If we collect organizations and not people.
So first thing, we should check what exactly
yes.
And, why is it this? And then it would be a provocative letter.
Yes, it must be.
We were very happy because this is a provocative letter.
Yes, but we circulate it when you have it.
Yes, I will check.
Yes.
Exactly.
And then I want to give the floor also to Italy, because the Italian women were so strong in Brussels when we were there. I understand now you have hands full with other subjects, so you couldn't come here. But we have an artist who was also performing in Brussels, and you have to introduce yourself. And we give the last comments to Italy.
It's midday.
A rumble in the sky. He, USA pilot, a thumb on a button, chewing gum, and a cynical smile. And of the people down there, eyes up in their uncertain faces. Nothing is left but black shadows on white marble, traces of living bodies, ashes, before time. Hey, shadow, what are you waiting for? I've lost my body. Hey, bodies, where are you? Your shadows are waiting for you. They're over there, alone, with the others. And even then, everyone cried, war, 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 never again. Now, this is, in conclusion, an invitation to peace. As usual, I have music, which I don't have, so try to be, invent in your mind a calypso, a good rhythm, something, you know, even a salsa, okay. So, da-da-da-da-da. Follow her. She's a good struggle. She was born in the future, but has lived since eternity. Her children and parents are love and wisdom. She grows on hugs, thrives on kisses, and in joy she hovers in the air like doves in the sky. Don't shoot her down. Don't shoot her down. No, no, no. Even if wounded to death, she survives. From the ashes of destruction and violence, she survives. But to make you happy, follow her, like you would follow a sparkling laughter. And remember, her name is Peace.